Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. You know, there's been a lot of talk about homeschooling lately. I wonder why that is. I think we're going to find out today. I'm joined by Robert Bortins, CEO of Classical Conversations, which is a Christian classical homeschooling program helping parents homeschool since 1997. And since Robert took the helm of the family business, because his mother started all of this, Classical Conversations has grown by, listen to this, 300%, and is the world's largest classical homeschooling organization. He also hosts a podcast called Refining Rhetoric. And, with public schools failing our students, we're having an exponential rise in homeschooling and also in charter schools. And we want to find out what the heck is going on here. So welcome to the podcast, Robert. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Dr. Carson, thank you so much for having me on. And we see parents all over, not just our country, but the world, realizing that the government-run systems are failing their students and looking to take education back into their own responsibility and doing so very successfully, and finding out that their children can become much more happier and better educated when they take that responsibility on themselves.
Absolutely. During the pandemic, a lot of things came to light. What impact did the pandemic and the post-pandemic period have on homeschooling?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we had roughly about 2.8 million homeschoolers in the United States. During the pandemic, if you look at the people who were not necessarily, doing public school at home, but, picking out their own curriculum, leading the educational endeavors, it rose to about 6 to 7 million homeschoolers.
Wow.
And then as schools opened back up, none of us really knew, was it going to drop back down to close to 3 million again, or these people were going to continue to homeschool. And I'm happy to report that, homeschooling is still around 5 million. So, a couple, a million or so people went back in, but a lot of those went to charter schools or private schools, different options than just their local government institution. The number of students enrolled in government schools is actually down 3% since the pandemic, while homeschooling in private school has increased. And so parents continue to see that when they make the educational choices for their children, that their children are happier, perform better academically, and are better, well-rounded citizens.
Well, what inspired your mom to start this? What was going on at the time that made her decide that this was the right avenue to pursue?
Yeah, so my mom and my dad both have aerospace engineering degrees from Michigan, and my mom graduated, went to work for Boeing, and just realized that when she had me that she wanted to give her family a different type of education. And as she began homeschooling us, she saw the need for curriculum and a need for families to get together and go through that curriculum together. So in 1997, as I was entering high school, she said to my friends and peers that were being homeschooled, "Hey, will you continue to homeschool through high school? I hope you get through these harder subjects, navigate getting into college, and we'll get together once a week and, be able to do things like debate, read history papers together, do things like mock trial and, dissect sharks and frogs and, some of those icky things you might not want to do at your own kitchen counter." And so that's how Classical Conversations was born in our basement in 1997 with myself and 10 other students. And today we have roughly 130, 140,000 students around the world using Classical Conversations in a weekly community, educating to get themselves together, not just lone schooling, but really a home-centered education.
Now, you must have been a little intimidated or thinking going to homeschool instead of going to high school, because people think high school, finally, girls and dates and football and all this great stuff, and thinking that maybe you were going to be missing out on that. What was your thinking at that time?
Yeah, I really enjoyed being homeschooled. We had a homeschool basketball team, and I was, starting point guard for them. So had plenty of athletic opportunities. Wasn't too much into girls at that point, although I did, start dating some girls when I was 16 and had a very nice high school sweetheart for a while until college came. So I don't really feel like I missed out on anything. And, nowadays there's so many people homeschooling through high school. There's homeschool proms. And, we have two of our students here in North Carolina are going to full rides for golf. We have had students, drafted in the Major League Baseball draft. So really football is the hardest thing for homeschoolers to do, but there's even homeschool football teams, and some guy named Tim Tebow, he managed to homeschool and play football as well. So there's really no endeavors that are closed off to homeschoolers. And because we're not locked into a school for 8 hours a day, we really have opportunities to pursue our passions. I knew I wanted to do engineering. I thought I wanted to be a computer engineer. So I found a small company and worked for them in high school. So I got real life experience and was able to build my resume as a high school student, doing something that I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life at that time. Obviously, things changed, but that experience was something that wouldn't have been attainable for me had I been in a brick building 8 hours a day.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that because, it's a concern of a lot of people. And, I've sat on admissions committees for both college and medical school. And the kids who were homeschooled were incredible. And they tend to do very well also. So more people need to talk about that. But what are the differences between classical education and modern education?
Yeah, I think it's our perspective on who students are and who are they to becoming. A classical education focuses on teaching truth, beauty, and goodness, that children are souls to be nurtured, versus modern education really focuses in on jobs and jobs creations and becoming really an economic engine and a part of the cog in the wheels, supporting big business and the big centralized government, where they're saying, how can we get the most taxes out of this person? How can we get them to be, economically feasible? Versus a classical education is really saying, how do we help this person become fully human, to really embrace, who they are, to become flourishing adults. And we know that when the Bible says, seek first the kingdom of God and all else will be added unto you. And so when you have an education that's classical and are focused on things that are eternal, turn out adults who are, healthy and wealthy, whether in our modern sense of money or in a sense of just self-worth and, knowing who they are and who they belong to. So it's really two different philosophies on what we want the ultimate outcome of education to become.
Now, some people say classical education and conservative are synonymous. Are they?
Well, as a conservative, I think that those who are classically educated will have more conservative bents, but we have plenty of professors that are, about the classics who are progressives. And so it's not necessarily going to be, a GOP form of education or anything like that. I think that hijacking could be bad for the classical movement. But I do believe when you have seen things like eternal truths, eternal beauty, things that really last a lifetime, versus some of these progressive ideas that are brand new and will ultimately, hurt individuals in the long run, that some of these maybe more bad ideas from the radical left are being flushed out of a classical education. And, you won't see some of these ideological ideas when you're studying the classics and having these robust discussions. And so it's not really about indoctrination as much as creating someone who knows how to think, who wants to be able to think well and reason well. And so, based on our backgrounds and, our shared life experiences, we could come to some different conclusions. But when we have a thought process that is governed by logic and by, historical testimony.
Yeah.
we're going to see, or we'll see a different type of society for sure than the direction we're going in right now.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons that it's so attractive, why things are growing so rapidly, because, in the classical education, you put the facts on the table. Like, you have two X chromosomes, you're female. You're X and a Y, you're male. End of story. Let's move on. And, confusing the kids with all of this spectrum of genders is just so unfair to the kids, quite frankly. There's so much more to do. But what do you say to those parents who say, I like the idea of homeschooling, but I don't know anything about physics or calculus. How am I going to make sure that my kids are prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, we've got tons of homeschooling curriculum out there for parents just like you who aren't experts in these different fields. Of course, you can look at our government system with the experts, and there's less than 30% of our students are at math or doing English or grammar at grade level. So it's clear that that system's not working either. One of the reasons that we have our communities at Classical Conversations is you're getting together with other students and other parents to practice these skills together. And so you don't have to be an expert at all of these things. And especially as the curriculum gets more difficult as the children age, because homeschooling really creates lifelong learners, the students are really teaching themselves, and they're coming to you and say, hey, I don't understand this question. And you're not trying to give them the answer. You're trying to give them the skills to find that answer. So, okay, well, let's go, go back a few chapters. Where was this in the book before? Or let's go to the library and grab another book on this subject. Or let's go talk to, Mr. Smith from church. He runs a company that does this, and he can answer your questions. So homeschooling is more about creating an individual that can be self-sufficient. And when you don't know something as a parent, you can really demonstrate how you go get knowledge you don't have. And that's part of that homeschooling experience that you really don't get in a private or in a public school system.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was at a private school, faith-based private school recently in North Carolina. It's a very, very well-organized school. But they have a program in which they allow homeschoolers to come in for, various things that they have available for them. And it's really sort of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many homeschoolers, you can take college courses, go to community college, get their associate's degree, take, classes with private schools, or even find, experts in the field or apprentice, or, get internships as in high school. So there's so many other opportunities when your life isn't being governed by some bureaucrat's educational calendar, that you can really pursue those things in life. If you're, really good at one subject, you can go, chase that and really excel at it. And if you're behind in some subject, you can spend a little bit of extra time on that. Education isn't something that just happens through 12th grade or college. It should be a lifelong endeavor, but our current system really kills that wonder that so many children innately have.
Well, one of the things that I learned in medical school was that everybody learns differently. And I wasn't doing well at first until I learned that I don't get anything from boring lectures. And when I start skipping the boring lectures and spending that time reading, everything was a snap.
Yeah.
And, homeschooling, allows people to take advantage of their method of learning, and they can learn a whole lot more and a whole lot faster that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my wife taught in the public schools for 10 years, and she had about 30 students in every classroom. So there's 30 students that needed to learn 30 different ways, some of them ahead and some of them behind. And it's just not a system designed for, educating our students. I'm always, I love your family story and how your mom, almost homeschooled you at night, not intentionally not knowing what she was doing, but just knowing that, the system that y'all were in wasn't going to provide the education that she wanted you all to have. And so I just tell parents, if Dr. Carson's mom can do it, so can you.
classical education, something so important these days. The Washington Post recently reported that homeschooling was the country's fastest growing form of education. That's pretty impressive. And in Washington, D.C., homeschooling increased by 108%. 108% since 2017. What has that kind of increase in homeschooling meant for classical conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we're just overwhelmed by the amount of interest in classical education and homeschooling. Just families from all over the United States of all demographic background, deciding to homeschool. I think African American homeschooling is the fastest rising demographic in the homeschooling world. Hispanics make about 20% of homeschoolers now, so it's really cool to see just that it's not religiously based or anything like that. It's that parents in general are saying, I can homeschool. And of course, some of the technological improvements at work, being able to work from home or work remote, has really led to the rise of more and more families having this accessible to them, or maybe you're not working full time or working a normal schedule, but you're still able to economically provide for your children and your family. And so it's just been a tremendous blessing to see just this movement. When we started Classical Conversations, there was maybe a few 100,000 homeschoolers in the entire United States, and probably just a few more than that in the entire world. And now that there's just this explosion of parents really had their eyes opened during COVID, seeing what their children were learning and what they weren't learning, and just that educational atmosphere that they were putting their kids in, that wasn't good enough for them and their family, and they were going to do something new. So it's just been a tremendous blessing. And, it's nice to feel like you're validated, that you see, classical education rising and homeschool rising and all these things that you've been working on for 25 plus years. But then you see that, it's only still, 3, 4, 5% of the United States getting this sort of education. And, we want to see 100% of parents and students, engaging with the classics, engaging with truth, beauty, and goodness. I know that's some of the work that you're doing at your great organization. Your podcast is a great way to encourage more families to take that leap.
No question about it. Charter schools have been growing too, but many people don't realize charter schools are actually public schools. And a lot of the gender ideology has been infiltrating into them. There was one Minnesota school that was in the news recently where they were forcing gender education, starting in kindergarten. And, it really is a little disturbing. Not that we don't want people to know about everything, but when it's sort of shoved down people's throats, you realize there was a Marxist like Vladimir Lenin who said, "Give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted." Once you put those things in there, it's really hard to undo that situation, which is why early education is so vitally important too. But the homeschooling process can start at any grade. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can start homeschooling at any grade, kindergarten. We know people who start at 12th grade, they say, I'm going to do it in my last year. So you can jump in at any time. You can jump out at any time, although we don't see too many people jumping out of homeschooling. Once you kind of get used to that kind of lifestyle and the benefits that it brings, you don't want to be constrained by someone else's calendar on your life. And so the number of families who want to continue homeschooling and just jump in at all sorts of levels is incredible. We hear of families. I want to give you this example. They had an older child, and then they had a few year gap in some younger children. So they're homeschooling their younger kids with classical conversations. Their older kid was at a good school, thriving, doing well, graduated from high school, and he was kind of jealous of the education that his younger siblings were getting. And so instead of going to college, he actually took a gap year and did our 12th grade program, which we call Challenge 4, so that he could experience a classical Christian education for 1 year before starting his life. So It's just, you can start at any time, and it's really, a fun way to learn. And, students really, when they see that life's more, not just about themselves and what they can get out of it, but what they can do for society, that is a harmony to life, that it's not all random, that there are, great heroes to learn from. They get inspired, and you really don't see a lot of these, issues that we see, like depression, is at an all-time high, suicide's at an all-time high in young people. And not that homeschoolers don't have those issues occasionally, but when you look at the scale of it, we're not experiencing those issues that young people are throughout the United States. And I think it's because it's a much more harmonious type of education than what our government-run systems are doing. And what they're doing to some of these ideological ideas at such a young age is just
It's child abuse.
It's child abuse. It's criminal. And the federal government is mandating a lot of this through the money that they give to the states. And we just see what the current administration is doing to force these ideas down young, innocent children's throats.
Yeah. Well, are there regulations currently existing for homeschools?
So each state has different regulations. Like, I'm in North Carolina, so we have to do an end of grade test every year for our kids once they turn 7, and we have to document that. The states like Oklahoma that have virtually no regulations. There's states that require you to test every other year. Like the state of Florida, I believe, has you meet with a teacher once a year, or fill out some paperwork. So it's not too difficult to homeschool in any single state. And of course, we're validated by the fact that colleges and businesses are actively recruiting homeschoolers to come to their institutions. So we know that they're getting a great education.
Now, there was a case, probably you're familiar with it, Carson versus Macon in Maine. Mm-hmm. And it was about voucher system and government funding. They concluded that if they were going to do it for one, they had to do it for all, including faith-based organizations. Does government funding lead to corruption? What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, Dr. Carson, I probably, I sympathize with trying to get as many kids out of our public system as possible, but I think it's called public because the government is funding it. And the reason that private education is successful is because it's being privately funded. So I just always ask people, please name one institution that hasn't been corrupted by government. I mean, I can name 1,000 that have been. Please just name one that hasn't been. And I have yet to hear one. I mean, the government has roles and responsibilities, obviously, like police, safety. Those are things that the Bible and what God has, as a Christian, has said the government's responsible for this. So those things would be potentially uncorruptible. But anything God has designed for the family or the church or the local community to be responsible for, when the government starts funding it, we see inflation increase and quality decrease. And so I'm very wary. As Reagan said, the 9 most scary words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And so we just saw, kind of like in COVID, the tentacles of government, and where they had their tentacles wrapped around you, you were forced to do what they said. Otherwise, you'd become unemployed. And so I'm just really wary for those of us who love freedom of selling it for a few shekels.
I agree with you 100%. And what about the whole issue of universal school choice? What's your thinking on that?
Again, I'm sympathetic to those ideas. And if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail for those people who are pushing it. But I'm against universal basic income. I'm against universal medical care. I'm against universal housing. And so I'm also against universal educational income.
What about those people who are in situations, let's say they're in a ghetto in an inner city? Have there been successful homeschooling programs in those kinds of environments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got all, demographics that have used classical conversations, single moms from every place on the corner of the globe who've managed to make it work. Of course, third world countries are homeschooling and doing it quite successfully. So, we're sympathetic to wanting to help people out. And we think that, 501c3s and charities and churches and, local groups have done a great job with that. And we can definitely raise more money and raise more awareness around that, because then you've got local private control over the funding versus the government being able to use strings. So, and unfortunately, these universal programs seem to be going to millionaires and billionaires who are already affording private schools. And so it hasn't seemed to really increase access like they've hoped. And so I really am weary of conservatives getting used to welfare from the state in order to pay for things that we want. I don't see that as a path towards freedom. So I think all of us have a responsibility to our local communities to make homeschooling and classical education more accessible to the least of these. And there's so many people who are working on that. Let's get behind them and fund it privately so the scope of our government doesn't continue to increase.
Now, are some of the parents, like in Arizona's voucher program, they can opt out of the public school system and have that money put into an escrow,
right,
which they can use at a private school, charter school. They can use it for homeschooling, for whatever they want to use it for. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in Arizona the number of individuals homeschooling has decreased, and a lot of them are now going to private schools or making different educational decisions for their kids based on that money being given to them by the government. And of course, some of them are still homeschooling. The Arizona rules allow you to bank that money away and actually use it to pay for college. But again, unearned money is corrupt to your soul. It destroys your soul when you have money given to you that you didn't personally earn. And so, I'm skeptical that it'll be healthy for our country in the long term if we normalize this type of government welfare system. So, I'm sympathetic. The public schools are called public schools again because they're funded by the public. You can, call it all you want, change the grammar, change language. That's something that's very familiar to the left, what they love to do. But if you're not actually getting kids out of the public school system, when you give everyone public money, you just bring more kids into the public school system, even if they're at institutions that aren't being governed specifically by the government. And so, I just think it's a very slippery slope, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm not hopeful that this is the best way to solve our educational crisis in the United States.
We've been having a fascinating discussion with Robert Bortins about classical education, about school choice, about a variety of things dealing with education. Education is so critical because if you get a good education, you pretty much write your own ticket. You can sort of do what you want to do. And if you don't get a good education, you got a tough way to go. I always say to young people, the average person lives to be about 80 years old. If you spend those first 20 years getting a good education, you have 60 years to reap the benefits. And if you spend those first 20 years not getting a good education, you got 60 years to suffer the consequences. So when you think about it that way, maybe really applying yourself is not such a bad thing. But I want to ask you, there's been a lot of reports recently about the failure of public schools. There was a project Baltimore. There were no kids out of more than 2,000 high school, middle school, and grade school who were proficient in math at grade level. I mean, what does that mean for their future? Is as an educator yourself, is there any hope for public schools? Do you have any suggestions for them?
Well, our public schools are wildly successful in what they've accomplished. And, a lot of people say our public schools are failing us, and they might be failing the children. That's absolutely true. But they're successfully implementing socialism and communism into our country. And that's because they're funded through the redistribution of wealth. They're not funded by the local individuals privately and the local businesses privately. It's taken through our tax dollars and redistributed. And so there's not any skin in the game on those attending. And, there's 50 schools, I think, in Chicago as well that have 0 students at grade level. And there you get like $30,000 a year. I know like Washington, D.C., I think spends like $40,000 a year per student, and almost none of them can read and do math. And so, I mean, I think the more money, as everyone likes to say, they need more resources. They've got more resources than private schools. Almost twice as much money goes into public education than it does private schools. So money's clearly not the issue. It's the underlying philosophies. And school is definitely not what it used to be, but every parent can homeschool. I think parents used to take more initiative in educating their kids, outside of the classroom. They knew that, of course they were getting some education in school, but, my dad's mom, they immigrated here, and they made sure that they're doing extra homework at night and making sure that they were engaging with their communities and their family, and not just expecting a system to educate them 9 to 5, that they had to engage in it afterwards. And so I think there's probably some things that could maybe put a Band-Aid on the system and make it so that it is not so harmful to our young people, for sure. And going back to the classics and teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, and staying out of these social issues and being an agent for social change. But the whole purpose of public schools, the reason that they were founded on, was to be an agent for public change and to change society. And so, like I said, they're wildly successful beyond the wildest dreams of those who founded our institutions. And they've just ingrained it into our society so well. Most of us can't think of a world outside of it. And, a lot of us did have good experiences, but mostly because we either had an individual who took some time out to really mentor us, or our families were effectively homeschooling us, outside of the time that we were inside the institution and really engaging with us. So,
A very good point.
I tell parents they can homeschool today. Just spend 30 minutes a day reading to them after school. Like, just don't like, even if you can't get them out of the public school system, like, you can start intentionally homeschooling them now. Because you've got the rest of the day and on the weekends, and you've taught your child to walk, you taught them a language. You're not a language expert, right? You didn't go to school for linguistics, most likely. Maybe you have 1 or 2 listeners that did, but you taught your kids the English language or the Spanish language or the Portuguese language. So all of us have that innate ability to teach our own kids, and we can start doing that by just reading with them every single night.
And I think one of the things that happens with classical conversations and such institutions is you teach children the concept of education, because most education actually occurs outside the classroom. If you are truly seeking, I know it was the case in my situation, because high school in Detroit inner city was not up to par, let's just put it that way. And some of the teachers were actually good teachers, but the kids were disrupted. They spent the whole time, managing the behavior of the class, and frequently didn't get a chance to get to the subject matter at all. I would go back after school and then say to my teachers, "What were you planning to teach today?" And they were happy that somebody was interested. But it makes a big difference if you can teach a child to want to learn, because they can learn an enormous amount on their own, by reading. And one of the things I've noticed about a lot of the homeschooling groups is, they would designate different parents to take the kids on field trips. And we'll have spoken to the people at the facility before the kids get there, and they get really some dynamite learning that way. But I want to ask you what you think will be the impact of AI and virtual reality on schooling, on education.
Yeah, I mean, AI and virtual reality, there's a lot of potential positive benefits, like any tool, if you use it properly, can be really cool. I mean, you could, be in a classroom with virtual reality and, go, visit some other foreign country or some historical site and see how it is. But if you have a headset on all day, like in the Matrix, that's probably not going to be very healthy for you. Same thing with AI. As that progresses, there's definitely some opportunities to, especially in some of these, in a system where you have 30 students in a classroom, be able to maybe help them see where they're missing information and go back and learn that more effectively. But a robot isn't going to teach you to love math. A robot's not going to teach you to love your humanity that's next to you. You need a physical person who loves life to really model that for you. And we see that in education, throughout the centuries, that you need someone, physically there in your presence, teaching you to really get that lifelong love of learning. And so, I think both of these things have potential benefits, when used properly and probably not too many hours per day, to really add that educational opportunity to more people who maybe can't afford to go on a vacation or a trip to see something. You can be transported there through a headset. But I am worried. My wife taught in public schools for 10 years. My future sister-in-law was a public school teacher, and for third graders, they just sat them down in front of a computer, and her job was to monitor them. And that would be a dangerous precedent if we have them on
I
doing that same thing with virtual reality and AI.
I think that's why we see this explosion in attention deficit disease, because as soon as the baby can sit up, people put them in front of the television. As soon as they have a little manual dexterity, you give them the Game Boy. Everything is zip, 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 zoom, 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 changing every few seconds. And then all of a sudden they're 5 or 6 years old and you put them in a classroom. The teacher's not turning to something every few seconds. They're not going to pay attention. Their mind is just racing. And I used to have parents who would come to me and say, "Doctor, is it okay if we put the kids on Ritalin or some other thing?" And I say, "Well, why do you need to do that?" They can't. Their attention span is just so short. And I say, "Well, before you put them on that, do something for me. Wean them off the TV, wean them off the video games, but don't just wean them off. Substitute time with you, reading and discussing things. Do that for 3 months, and then when I see you again, let me know if they still need it." Almost universally, they didn't need it anymore at that point.
No, I mean, you're telling them to homeschool them basically, and spend time with them. And yeah, I mean, screens are so bad for us. We know that. I mean, the science, you know the science better than I do, but I mean, the science is there that that's not a healthy way for us to learn. And I think I saw a study. I think now the human attention span is less than a goldfish. And so, I just remember growing up and thinking, man, 8 seconds is attention span for a goldfish. Well, now Americans have like an attention span of like 7.2 seconds or something.
Yeah.
So the goldfish is winning.
And it affects the creativity too. The social psychologists tell us that little babies, 97% of little babies are creative. Have you ever noticed you can give a baby a gift, they'll spend the time playing with the wrapping paper. I mean, they're just having a fascinating time with that. But they say by the time kids reach age 16, only 3% are still creative. That says a lot about what happens during that developmental period and how much potential is being lost and why we need to really work on that. And, when it comes to AI and virtual reality, we have enough trouble keeping the kids off of the Nintendo now. Can you imagine when they can disappear into their own fashioned world, how difficult it's going to be to bring them back to reality? And it's going to be extra important that parents understand and recognize the role that they have. You only have your kid for like 18 years and you're gone. I mean, yes, you still stay in contact with them, but in terms of your ability to really influence who they are, you don't have that much time. And you need to realize that. I think that's one of the reasons that grandparents get along so well with their grandkids, because grandparents know that they're not going to be there very long. That's going to get, and they're gone. And we need to really begin to emphasize what parents are there for. You know, God's original model, man, a male and a female, to procreate, to expand. And, the traditional family model has broken down tremendously, where the values are passed on, where essential education about how you treat other people is passed on. And I think when you can have an environment such as homeschooling, where you can pass on those values and you can live those values and you can show those values to the children without having some prescribed Marxist ideology forced down your throat, you provide those kids with a tremendous advantage if you're able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason that our country is hitting the family breakdown is because we've embraced, Marxist ideology of redistribution of wealth and have taken responsibility away from the parents and given it to the government. So, yeah, it's a sad state we're in, but a state that we can definitely rebound from.
Well, where can people learn about your podcast, and what are some of the kind of topics that you cover?
Yeah, you can go to refiningrhetoric.com. Of course, we're on all the podcast platforms and YouTube. And, we interview thought leaders. We interview business leaders. We talk about current events through a classical Christian worldview. So we practice the tools of learning together so that as adults, we can continue to engage in our culture in a way that's reflective of our worldview.
Well, thank you for being willing to join the fray. And, we all have a responsibility in our sphere of influence to pass on knowledge in the right way, to pass on values in the right way, to understand what made America into a great country. It was our values and our sense of community and the sense of the common good, all the things that are being dismissed these days. We taught people to love your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor if they disagree with you. And we need to get back to those things. And you're doing your part. Any closing thoughts for our audience?
No, Dr. Carson, thank you so much. I think you nailed it on the head. And go to classicalconversations.com if you want to find out more about homeschooling with classical conversations and connecting with a local community.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Classical education, homeschooling, influencing our young people to move them in the right direction. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. What an incredible responsibility. Parenting is perhaps the best and the most important job that any of us have. And if we do it the right way, we're much more likely to produce individuals who will be beneficial to the society that they grow into. We hope that you will remember to subscribe for free, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us, review us, tell your friends and your family about us, and spread common sense. Our goal is to make common sense common once again. And remember the cornerstone principles: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.